So welcome, Francoise. We are here on our first, again, episode of 80/20 Agency TV and podcast, and hopefully a few other platforms with this content. But welcome to you as our special guest, and it's kind of funny because I work with you every day. So for everybody who's out there, Francoise is the creative director at 80/20 Agency. And we've been talking about this for a while, and it's fun to actually share our thoughts, our observations, and a little bit of our expertise, if we can be bold enough to say that. But I think it's important to share what we have going on here and what we have picked up on, and walk the talk and share our content. So I know that, and I want to let everybody know that I am quite proud to have found Francoise, and she is top-notch talent, and that's the one thing I can claim that I am good at. I'm good at finding great people, and she comes to us from Knoxville. She was at an agency down there, and previously she was at Michigan State University. So to get things rolling, why don't you take over and tell us about your background and a little more details of how you ended up here as creative director.
Sure. So I'm originally from Metro Detroit and grew up there, and then went to Michigan State University, where I got a bachelor's in fine arts in studio art, which was kind of our art-geared graphic design degree. So I also studied painting and a very intense-sounding concentration called Electronic Arts and Intermedia. Graduated from there and stayed and worked for University Advancement and Development, and started as a student intern way down the totem pole, and stayed for years, about 5 years, and ended as the art director for the Alumni Association. So had a very steady climb up through a lot of different positions to end at that. Worked with many students there, and ended up getting a job at an agency. Got the itch to try something different and have some new challenges and get out of in-house design. So I got a job down in Knoxville, Tennessee, and moved down there and worked for a small agency. There was only about 28 people, I think, at the time I left, and we did a full service, big range of clients, a lot of higher ed, which was a big reason I went there, because it was familiar territory. And then kind of by chance, a job opened up here in Bloomington for my husband, actually, at the university, and we figured it was too good to pass up. So we came up here, and I think through several strokes of luck, you and I found each other, and got this position here.
Good. So this is kind of off the cuff, but how do you like Bloomington?
I love it. It's so funny, and I was just talking about it this weekend, that it feels a lot more like home than Tennessee did, and Tennessee was wonderful, no shade there, but coming back further north towards the Midwest more is definitely a welcome comfort.
So if you're going to pick one key thing that people would want to know, or you would love to share, that's unique and just fun about Bloomington, or that you love, what would it be?
Especially because of where we live now that we've moved out of town a little bit, we have this really nice juxtaposition of being in town and having limitless opportunities because of the university and all that brings. And then where we are, we're kind of in the middle of nowhere, and we get to enjoy that still and have that really nice balance of feeling like everything is at your fingertips, but it's not a big city, and being able to get out of town really easily.
Yeah, and you have a beautiful location where you
Yeah.
have your new home, so
Yes.
That's exciting. So back to your career type of stuff, have you always wanted to be a graphic designer? Has that been your plan right from your high school years?
I knew I wanted to be in the arts in some way, but my first real career goal was to go into medical illustration. So when I started at Michigan State, it was a big reason I chose that university, because I was able to merge a human biology degree path and that studio art degree path. So I was very lucky to have been involved in a professorial assistantship when I entered the university, and it meant that I got to start working as a student medical illustrator, right away. So I got to work in the dissection lab and with staff in the radiology department, and kind of dip my toes in the water and see how I liked it. And I ended up finding myself craving more of the art side. So I loved being the only art person in a field of a bunch of faculty and staff that were very analytical. And I did things like host sessions of teaching them how they could make their presentations visually more effective. They have some of the biggest lectures on campus, over 600 people. So we did things like font testing as part of one of my research projects, made slides for them to put up and test which were most legible, and had the entire 600-person lecture hall vote on what they could read best. And that, I think, kind of sealed the deal. And I was like, oh, I want to do that. So I leaned in, kept up with some human bio on the side, but then stuck with design, and I think found a good home for myself there.
Great. Well, it's a big change from, it seems, to what you're doing now. So how has your career changed as a graphic designer, going from medical illustration to, a true graphic designer doing only graphic design, to what you're doing now? How has your life and your work changed?
It has become exceptionally more diverse. So starting out, I think in a good way, it was a lot more about building skills. Learning production in particular was a really big hurdle of learning that I don't think I necessarily accomplished within my degree path. So once I gained all of that, by the end of my time, especially at Michigan State, I was still very focused on production and communication management type things. And since then, and mainly with this role here, it's become much more broad. So I spend a lot more time helping in strategy and developing what the goal is from the get-go and what kind of things we're going to produce from the beginning. Helping coordinate video shoots and giving direction on messaging. So a lot more hands-on in the best way possible.
Yes, and I'm so thankful for that, because I asked for a lot more advice than just graphic design expertise. But it's been a lot of fun and super helpful. I'm glad you like it. I hope you like it. So what type of people do you think, in terms of personalities and characteristics, make for good or great graphic designers?
I think to rewind, I think what is a good designer now is a really holistic designer. It's a little bit more difficult to be successful with a really narrow path in design these days. You kind of have to know a little bit of everything. So because of that, I think curious people make the best designers, because not only do you need to be able to learn a ton of side skills, but by nature, the software that we use to make what we make is constantly evolving. I mean, we get new updates all the time, and there's new tools that you need to learn, and the industry standard rises as those tools rise. So to stay on top of that wave, you have to be curious. You have to look forward and say, oh, how did that person make that? And look for the next thing, kind of perpetually.
Yes, and open to change, right? Very
open to change. So that's another really good point, actually. Being open to criticism is a massive part of this job. A lot of people who enter it are naturally creative, and there's a certain sense of ownership that comes when you make something yourself, from scratch. You get this idea, you build it, and then to have someone take a critical eye to it can sometimes just be like, oh, a knife to the heart, right? And when it becomes your job, it's a business. So you need to be able to split that up just a little bit and have really good rationale for your creative decisions in a strategic way. But take the criticism. If someone doesn't like something, that's okay. It's not on you,
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And what would you say are some skills that you need as a designer, or to be a great designer, that are beyond the Adobe suite?
Yeah, so theoretically, if you're a rock star in the Adobe suite, that's a great foundation. It doesn't necessarily make you rise to the pile of, let's say, a stack of resumes. That's not a differentiating factor anymore, and it kind of used to be, because the programs were still being learned so much. So now things like any type of motion design is a huge bonus. Business skills in general, kind of having that business mindset will help you work better. Let's say you're at an agency. Having a business mindset and better time management will help you work well with account managers and brand managers. decent copywriting skills will help you work a lot better with the copywriters, because those things are completely inseparable in design. Good design is about effectively communicating a message visually, so you have to kind of have a push and pull with those staff members if you're at a place that has them. Visually, you could have come up with a great solution. If the copy doesn't fit it, then it's not a great solution, and vice versa. So that's become bigger and bigger. Writing for social media, a lot of designers who are tasked with social media graphics now have to write the captions themselves too. So it's huge, huge.
Yes, exactly. And the ultimate goal of a great ad or a great message is to be clever and concise. So
Yes.
if you can know words and have suggestions on words and copywriting, it just makes, the project can go so much better. But if you have no input and no idea of how to, suggest better content, you're just, relying on what was given to you.
And I think it's intimidating to a lot of designers. There's a lot of old jokes of people saying things like, I'm in design because I can't write or I can't do math or XYZ. And they're just not so dissimilar. You're finding creative, witty solutions visually, and it's the same with copy. You just have to apply that same mindset. And I think more people would be better at it than they think, as long as they do it properly.
Yes. And I think the agencies or whoever you're working for, even if it's in-house, to be open to everyone's suggestions. And sometimes they say, oh no, you're not the writer, and I don't think that's fair. And obviously we try to embrace that philosophy. I mean, I don't care where the idea comes from. Give me ideas, because don't hold back.
Yeah, and if you go to a workplace that doesn't have that kind of environment that we have here, it's good to be the advocate for it and say, no, I do have these ideas, or hey, if we cut out these couple words, this is what the design could look like. And I think more places would knock down some of those silos that tend to happen in the creative process, and really the work just gets astronomically better when that's the case.
Yes. Okay, Nat, let's jump over to one of our favorite hot topics. It's, you know what I'm going to say?
Yeah.
Grammar.
Yay, grammar.
How important is grammar in our world?
Incredibly. And even in the world of design, it needs more light shed on it. I'm a huge advocate for using proper grammar. And a big part of that is that it's a technical issue in design. There are different glyphs for these different punctuation marks that you have to use correctly to have proper, effective communication and design. N dashes versus M dashes, different types of quotation marks. They're very important when it comes to professional communications. There's kind of this idea sometimes, I think, that typing has become so automatic because we use spell check, and there's all these measures that can help. Grammarly, for example, wonderful resource. But in design, when you're building it yourself, it's way more DIY. When you're typing it in that box, you have to be the one to say, I want this glyph to show up here, and make sure that it's in the right place, and not having that can dismantle a piece, especially on something like social media. You have such a short amount of characters. If there's a mistake in that, then however many hundreds or thousands of people see it right away, and it devalues your brand.
Yes, exactly. And then another hot topic is proof. Right?
Yep.
So how important is proofing? And do you have any tips and suggestions in your years of expertise of having to go through multiple proofs? And we know that part of doing great design means gobs of iterations, which you have to have patience with, but how important is proofing?
It's completely essential to completing anything well. My biggest tip would be to have a visual proof that you run through. So if it's me making something and I'm the only person that's really going to look at it, ideally there'd be multiple people, but I have to split it up. I have to proof it just for the language, which is really difficult when you've been staring at something for 10 revisions. The words kind of turn on you a little bit. So you have to read it back. There's the old trick of one word at a time, and sometimes you go backwards down a line and then forwards to help kind of cut out your assumptions on what you think you're reading. So one proof just on language, just letters, just punctuation. And then another proof of proofing if your document is built correctly, proofing your color spaces and all that kind of, do you have proper bleeds and all that kind of stuff. But don't do it all at the same time, because you will miss things on one or the other if you don't kind of split your brain for that moment.
Yeah, and we've all missed something in proofing, and it just makes you crazy. So that's why I say proof, like at least 3 times.
Absolutely.
And that's a bare minimum. So what advice would you give to all those young whippersnappers out there wanting to get into graphic design? What's the advice you would give?
Oh gosh, I think what I like to say is just ask as many shameless questions as you can. Being a student and having the social status as a student gets you a really long rope with people, and reaching out to industry professionals and asking just kind of shameless questions like, hey, I'm thinking about going into this, or how do you do this? People are a lot more willing to be patient and respond to students asking those questions, instead of, who are people who may be considered professionals already. So use that to your advantage. Ask a lot of questions. If you're curious about a field, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to reach out and find someone in it and have them become a mentor, which is another huge thing. If you can find someone that's kind of on that path, that you at least see, hey, that next step, they're in that next step that I want to be in. Just hold on to each other. And most of the time I find that once you learn something, you can't wait to teach someone else. So be the person that gets that knowledge that someone's just waiting to share.
Exactly, yes. So we left something out from your intro. You're an instructor here at Indiana University. I say here because it's literally across the street.
A couple blocks down.
So anyways, tell me about your experience as an instructor for graphic design, and what are tips would you give to students to get the most of their graphic design classes? And should it just be graphic design students? I know you've talked about people from different programs taking your course.
Oh yeah, so I taught this past academic year an intro to graphic design class. It was my first time formally teaching, and I think a big reason why I was so excited was because I had so much experience managing students at Michigan State that became one of my favorite parts of my job, was teaching students, especially things like production and things that I knew I didn't fill in my degree necessarily, and try to give them that huge head start. Like, okay, you gotta be ready to run when you hit your first full-time job outside of school. So teaching is like that amplified, right? Because they're really there to learn, and you literally get them in a bubble with you for 3 hours, 2 days a week. And I had a very diverse group of students because we were an intro class. So some were seniors graduating in an unrelated field and thought, hey, this could be a bonus. Maybe I can make my resume look better. And then there are students who are starting out their career as a designer, hopefully. So I think making your path clear, especially with your instructor, like communicating, no, I'm going into design. You'll get a little different, you'll take different nuggets out of the class, right, than those who aren't necessarily following down that path. And I had a lot of students show me work that they were doing on their own, so they'd learn a skill in class and they'd try to make something on their own. And I'd give them feedback on that all the time. And I think that's a big bonus that most instructors are willing to do and not a lot of students take advantage of.
Well, they were lucky to have you.
Oh, thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about your generation, which is the millennial generation.
Yes.
And here at 80/20, we really focus on being experts on Gen Z, because they're the new hot generation up and coming, and they are actually the ones who are in high school and in college right now. The millennials are now off beyond college and having families, starting their careers, having babies, all that kind of stuff, and they're into their 30s. So tell me what you think are some of the key differences between a millennial and a Gen Z person.
I've had to think about this a lot because we have such a different structure here, where we have, a bunch of Gen Z students and some freelancers now graduated. helping us with work and being really involved in the process. And I didn't think we were all that dissimilar until really working here and being like, you know what, there's different there's different levels of social responsibility, I think. And I'm sure that's magnified because we work with brands so often, and that's what we talk about and that's who we help. But seeing the pressure of social responsibility, I guess, is much, much higher in Gen Z, notably. And surprisingly enough, I feel like millennials still spend tons and tons of time on social media and on their phones, and Gen Zers waver a little bit. They go out in nature more often, and they're a little less connected. I think they're more wary of social media than some millennials are.
Yes, and some people have coined Gen Z as the next greatest generation because of their incredible, characteristics, their values, the way they're standing up for causes.
Yes.
It's really impressive. So they sometimes get a bad rap, but I definitely, and we have noticed, they're trailblazing the new way for living right and doing things right and standing up for what they believe is right.
Yeah, and I really think there's a stronger feeling of like one person can make a difference. I think that's really strong in that generation. Obviously, not that it's not present in others, but I think you see it more clearly. People are far more outspoken about what they're passionate about and things like that. So I think it's wonderful to see, but it's definitely interesting that it's kind of made itself so clear that that's
exactly.
a trend.
And we notice now in branding and all the research that these younger people are demanding it in their brands as consumers, because they will pay a premium price and they will not pay for certain things because of the values or what they're doing beyond just selling you a product.
Absolutely.
Yes. So that could be a whole other podcast, so we won't get into
We'll
that.
table that for now.
So let's just talk about you as a brand designer, because we have now coined you as that. You're not
Yes.
just a graphic designer, because you still do fabulous graphic design, but I truly believe you are a brand designer, and you've created brand new brands for many of our clients, and then we've refreshed some brands. Mm-hmm. So what do you think it's like to be a brand designer? Because I think I think students would love to think of themselves or aspire to be a brand designer. It's not used out in the common world as a career path, but I think I'm just predicting that that's going to be a position of the future.
Yeah, I see it as a companion. You have experience as a brand manager, and I see it as the companion to that. So just like a brand manager advocates for consistency and spread and growth of a brand, that's what that brand designer can have, but from a building perspective, right? So it's not your responsibility to just make an effective initial brand and concept for a company, let's say. You have to build it and give it the roots to grow. So it needs to be flexible. You have to plan for other people to use it beyond yourself, even if it's members of your own team internally, or you wrap it all up and you give it to the client for them to use. You kind of have to make it and let it go and grow and plan for that on purpose, so it's known. So you plan for the ways it could grow, and you build in almost a safety net for it to be successful in all those outcomes.
Yes, and essentially what we've been doing is giving companies and departments brand toolkits and letting them loose, and we've coined now the DIY of branding and marketing, because we really are having to hand it over, and we encourage that. We all often say we don't want to hold you hostage, that only we can make the edits, or only we can make the posts, or only we can edit your website.
Yeah.
We really do want to be a partner, and companies want to do it themselves, and I get that. And when you come from the client side, you want to be able to do it yourself. That was one of the reasons I became got trained on my own as a graphic designer, because I was on the client side, and I wanted to be able to get into the file and make the edits. And so it inspired me. So I think there is a need for that, especially with all the entrepreneurialism and smaller businesses and companies on the internet, we have to embrace that it can't be the agency versus the client. We have to work together.
Exactly. And there's so many tools now that fill in that gap a little bit. You don't have to be able to use the Creative Suite to be able to make so much of this stuff. So instead of kind of keeping it all wrapped up in there, we can flow between and give some things to them for them to be able to complete and feel empowered to complete on their own, and know that we've given them enough of a guide that they're confident in what their brand would say, you know, what kind of language they would use and the visuals, and knowing they're staying within the guidelines. I think it's wonderful, and it only means more people are involved and more people are excited about making the brand come to life.
Exactly. And then we also see it in the influencer world, which we're trying to keep up with and understand, because people have their own personal brands. It's exploded. So that's a whole other market and place where they're DIYing their own branding. And I think if we are able to tell them that you need a little bit of professional, help to get it going, and then cut them loose, and then they're off to the races.
Absolutely.
I think we have pretty much tackled more than what we thought.
Nice.
And it is just so fun. I just have to say, I'm so glad that you found us, I found you. We had breakfast that one day, and I can't wait to see how 80/20 hopefully explodes with your help and leadership. And I know the interns love, and our staff love working with you. So
Thank you,
Gagnier,
Kelly.
thank you for being an awesome partner in this business.
Thanks, Kelly.